welcome back to the Athens Democracy Forum. It's lovely to be here with you, and I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Farah Nayeri. I'm a culture writer for the New York Times. The theme of our discussion today is religion. Is religion, the question is, a force for good in a secular democracy, or is it a force that can breed problems and issues such as populism, such as exclusion, such as intolerance? Now, it's a very topical, I guess, theme. Religion is always topical, never goes out of fashion. And we have three distinguished panelists who each will bring a very different answer to this question because they come from very different walks of life. My first panelist is Archbishop Nikitas, who is the Greek Orthodox Archbishop of Great Britain. There are more than 500,000 Greek Orthodox in Great Britain, so he's got a lot of followers, more than any of us on Twitter, I think. And the second guest we have here today is Fatima Zaman, who's an advocate from the Kofi Annan Foundation. And last but not least, we have the Vice President of the European Commission joining us from Brussels with the European flag behind him. It's Margaritis Schinas. As I said, a very wonderfully diverse and varied panel. So my first question will be to the Archbishop. I heard a story before actually meeting the Archbishop about him, and I thought I'd first fact check it and verify it with him, which I did because I want to make sure I got it right. And so the story goes, and it's true, that the Archbishop had an invitation to speak to the One Young World group of young people in London. And it was a very, very large, I guess, gathering, and he was there to talk about religion and faith and truth and good and evil, I guess. And as he was sort of launching into his introduction, his cell phone rang, his mobile phone went off, and the Archbishop picked up the phone, and it was God. And so God had some message, I guess. And the Archbishop said, this is really not a good time. You know, I'm in the middle of something. Can you please get to the point? And then there was a very brief exchange, and the Archbishop hung up. And so my question to you, Archbishop, because I wasn't there, is, you know, what was God's message, and did he leave a voicemail, or?
Well, God did not leave a voicemail, but before I get to that, let me say thank you to you, Farah, and to the Democracy Forum for not only inviting me to come to Athens, and I'm especially honored as a Greek citizen, but also to have the opportunity to be part of a panel and to share some ideas. To be brief, because we have limited time, is that we have to listen carefully to what God says. Too often, I think we, even as religious leaders, listen to ourselves. We don't hear the clear message of God. And the message of God is quite easy. It's summed up in love, peace, goodness, harmony, tranquility, other positive aspects of life, no matter which faith tradition you examine. Of course, I look at things as a Christian. But we also have to understand that there are people who hear their own voices. You know, we hear in the Hebrew scriptures, in the book of Judges, that God raised up the judges to save the people from those who would plunder them. Now, God may raise up judges these days to lead and guide the people, but I think many individuals raise themselves up and they plunder the people. They lead them in the wrong direction, because the truth of God, which comes also through democracy and hearing the voices of people and sharing and understanding and exchange, allow us for these things. But I'll stop there so that the other panelists will have opportunities, then we'll go into a dialogue.
Well, I'll ask you just follow up. You know, there are some people who say, I don't believe in God. And so what would you say to them?
If you believe in God or not, I think you still espouse and accept the same virtuous qualities in life. An atheist does not want to believe in war or murder or all sorts of other things. Any person with reason And reason is a human being with logic, with tradition, with understanding, with values, even if they're cultural values, will say that we have to work for good. And our responsibility, whether we're atheists, we're Muslim, Christians, Hindus, is also to make the world a better place than we found it. So the next generation might see something more positive, but also have examples that there are people who labored for good and for goodness and truth. And
yeah, I mean, when we had a few email exchanges, I have to say, yes. And in one of them you said, "I am a bit radical for an Orthodox clergyman. You need to get out of the past." And I think you really do, when one meets you in person, you're very accessible. You know, you're truly someone, you know, very comfortable and relaxed, etc. And so do you think it's important for men and women in your position, religious leaders, to speak to the young and to have a kind of young presence as you do? Is that part of being more modern in religion? Or?
Well, I don't know if it's being more modern, but I think for myself and my own tradition, I have to ask myself two questions. If Jesus were in my position, how would he act? What would he say? What would he do? And the second question is, if the other person is Jesus, how would I treat that person? So he went to the leper, to the prostitute, to the poor, to the indigent, to those suffering. And I think that is the core value system that we all have to embrace. And we feel that especially through the ecumenical patriarchate, the most open, the most prepared for dialogue, for cooperation, not only with Orthodox, with other religious systems and traditions.
Yeah. Let's move on to Fatima. Fatima Zaman, as I said, you're an advocate for the Kofi Annan Foundation, and you define yourself as a modern Muslim.
Yes,
and you say that you remain convinced and that religion or faith is a force for good, and that you recognize that it can be used as a weapon for destructive actions.
Absolutely.
But so can you develop that idea a little bit more? And I mean, we are seeing, unfortunately, in the world today, in almost all religions, but also in Islam, ways in which Islam has been used to justify violence. And so how do you reconcile your faith with this kind of complicated reality?
So, Farah, I like to call myself a bit of a hybrid. I'm British, I'm Muslim, I'm South Asian, and those three identities born into me have been at odds with one another for a long time. And so as you come into your formative years, you have to, as any young person, you have to figure out, who do I want to be? And I call myself a modern Muslim because I truly believe and I remain hopeful that faith is an integral part of modern society. It's an integral part of democratic societies. And that is because, we are in Athens, the mecca of democracy. And to bring people together of different cultures and values is something that the ancient Greeks practiced for so long. So I truly believe that religion has a place in modern day society. However, being a Muslim, working in countering violent extremism, myself being exposed to people who have become radicalized and chosen very violent religious ideologies as a result of certain grievances, I've seen both the light that religion offers and also the dark side of religion. Working in countering violent extremism, you see people who politicize religion, who peddle it to achieve very violent means. And equally, you've seen those in power who run nations also use religion as a way to enforce violence upon people. So there's this how can I put it? There is this constant struggle where faith or religion is pulled by forces of good and forces of evil. And as a young, modern Muslim woman, do I believe that young people do need to engage with faith? Absolutely. Do I think, you and I should be having these conversations as interfaith dialogues? Absolutely, because that's when you can push out and drown out those evil and dark voices.
I'd like to turn to Brussels, where Mr. Schinas is joining us, the Vice President of the European Commission. Mr. Schinas, you're working very much on the issue of the European Union's relationships with religious institutions. And I believe that there's an Article 17, in which basically the European Union, pledges to respect and not prejudice the status under national law of churches and religions, and to maintain open, transparent, and regular dialogue with churches and organizations. Now, of course, as we know, that Europe has had this very, very long battle, church versus state. You know, it took many years. You know, it was only about a century ago that church and state were separated in many of these countries. And so how does a secular institution like the European Union engage in dialogue with religious institutions?
First of all, let me tell you how happy I am to join you this morning. A particular good morning to His Eminence Archbishop Nikitas, whom I met 20 years ago in Hong Kong.
Yes. And
it's a pleasure to see him after so many years. In Europe, as you know, everybody fought everybody else for centuries, and basically on everything. There were so many cleavages, and the religious cleavage obviously was the central part of this conflict. Since the European integration kicked off almost 70 years ago, there was not one single shot that was fired in what is now the European Union, which clearly shows that the European Union is the world's epicenter of peace and peaceful coexistence. And where one of the things that we managed to do well is to blend our identities, our values, our diversity into a single project of communality, if you like. And of course, it's inherent in European Union politics. Identity politics is very much what Europe is about. But looking back, our main tragedies, our biggest tragedies, were precisely because of identity politics leading to exclusion. So there was always this careful dilemma between openness, which may lead to delusion, but closure that will certainly lead to exclusion. So over the years, the European Union, I think, through what we now call the Charter of Fundamental Rights, found a way to reflect all this in a way that constitutes a corpus of values that we can all share in, where we do not view our journey together as us versus them. I said last year to the European Parliament, when I was invested as a Commission Vice President, that for me, Europe is not a bulldozer that would impose to everybody else our own values and beliefs. It's rather a mirror that reflects the diversity and richness of our religions, of our ways of life, of our arts, culture, language, history, and this is what makes us unique in a world that is becoming darker and darker.
Yeah, but
and the final point on Article 17, you rightly point out that Article 17 of the treaty introduces a regular dialogue with the churches and religions and communities of belief. But this is not a dialogue between the different religions and churches. It's a dialogue between all the churches and the European institutions on the issues of the day, like migration, the economy, cohesion in society, Europe in the world. And this gives us strength because it reinforces this sense of communality coming from different contributions.
Yeah, I mean, you say that the European Union is, a kind of mirror reflecting the realities of basically the continent of Europe. And that mirror also has some sort of dark spots at the moment, and as you referred to some of the tragedies of the past having to do with identity politics, the Holocaust being, the most important one, at least in recent times, and so you also, Mr. Schinas, are in charge of looking at the issue of anti-Semitism, and that's of course a reflection of how religion or how religious difference can breed true difficulty. So what is the European Union doing about anti-Semitism and sort of combating it concretely?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The European Union is facing, especially after the 10 years of the economic crisis that exacerbated lots of social disequalities and friction and alienated many people from politics. We do face rising phenomena of racism, xenophobia, intolerance, hate speech, anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia. This is again something that we are determined to fight against. We will not tolerate these voices that want basically to undo the success of 70 years of integration. We are very encouraged by the fact that as the economy in Europe improves and as we manage to find collective ways of responding to major crises like migration, like the pandemic, these voices are being weakened. Because the best antidote to these policies, to this phenomena, is good policies. If the European Union is perceived as an entity that can protect or empower Europeans, the voices of hatred, of extremism, of xenophobia, intolerance, anti-Semitism will subside. Mm-hmm. So we are working very actively on this. We are also, in terms of anti-Semitism, trying to address major issues that have to do with security of our Jewish communities in Europe. We are fighting also fake news, disinformation, and we are involving now a very close working relationship with the platforms to make them see that they have also an interest to give us a hand in all that. But this is, of course, a process. It's not something that will happen from one day to the other.
Right. I mean, we're not hearing Mr. Schinas very well in the studio. If we could turn up the volume just a tad. Archbishop, I was going to bounce off what we just heard from Mr. Schinas in Brussels. Clearly, there are religious communities in Europe today who that are persecuted, that face persecution, face intolerance, face vandalism, face violence towards places of worship. I imagine that the Greek Orthodox community in Great Britain is not one of those communities, that you're not, that you're very well accepted and integrated. But have you encountered this sort of identity politics and us versus them in Britain in other ways?
Well, I've only been there about a year. Right. But I think people in Britain, because it's a very mixed society, are used to working and dealing and understanding one another. But I don't think that is a universal truth throughout the world. We always fear, and the minister used the word, of course, the other. We fear the other. Not only if we fear the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Roma community. So things are not only by religion. And that's because we've built walls of separation and don't sit to share in dialogue and in a meal. May I share a very brief story, and I'll make it brief.
Okay.
There were two monks, and they'd lived together many years in peace and tolerance. And one of them went to the city, and he saw an argument on the way. And he was amazed and asked, what's happening? He says, it's an argument taking place. Mm-hmm. I'll share it with my brother monk when I return. He returned to the monastery. He said, brother, I saw the most amazing thing. I saw an argument. The second monk said, what's an argument? And he began to explain. He says, I have an idea. I'll take this brick and I'll put it between us and I'll say it's my brick. And you will say it's your brick and we will argue whose brick it is. So the first monk took the brick and in an adamant way forced it down and said, "Brother, this is my brick." And the second monk says, "If you say so, it is." Now we can take bricks and make them ours and build walls, or we can take bricks and build bridges. And the time has come for religious leaders who are supposed to guide the people to build bridges. And if religious leaders can come into dialogue and take away that expression of the other, the xenos, and the word for fear, phobia, and put it to the side, then the followers should be real followers and follow the true religious leaders and build bridges of understanding, cooperation, and partnership.
Thank you, Archbishop. Fatima, we have a question coming in from one of our listeners or viewers today. It's saying, do you think that the religiosity of political leaders has an effect on the practice of democracy? In other words, if our political leaders are religious as well as being political, does that actually spoil or in some way harm democracy?
I think, Farah, that's a great question. Before I answer that, I do want to respectfully disagree with my European fellow panelist for a second here. I fundamentally disagree with the experience that Europe is a home where different religions are currently coexisting peacefully, and the account that our EU Commission colleague gave is not the lived reality that I face in parts of Europe when I travel. I still feel unsafe to walk in parts of, Eastern Europe without getting dirty looks, being called, very racially abusive remarks, and being threatened with violence. So I invite him to walk the streets of Europe far more often than perhaps he may have recently done so, and leave the comfort of Brussels where everyone is in a diplomatic community and feel very safe, and to try and answer that question more truthfully, because I do fundamentally disagree that Europe is currently a place where I don't experience Islamophobia, almost every day.
Okay, I think it would be fair to go back to Mr. Schinas, because you're saying to Mr. Schinas that he doesn't have a real experience of life, which I'm sure he does. People in Brussels are also human beings, I think.
No, I didn't say they're not human beings.
No, but I think he's not. I don't think he's in an ivory tower. So I think we need to.
Thank you.
So I'd like to bounce back to you, Mr. Schinas, and ask you this very real and true question, because this is a reality for many people in the European Union. I'm from Iran myself. Fatima is just describing her experiences. It is not easy for, people from different communities. We've discussed anti-Semitism. There's also the problem of Islamophobia. And so that's something that I guess Fatima is referring to. So what is the EU doing about that?
I must say that I have heard worse things during the Brexit referendum on Europe and Brussels. So I'm sort of immunized to this sort of argument. Although the people who were using these arguments in Britain, now they have to find a way to explain the mess they created to their compatriots, but that's another
that's another issue.
So, the European Union is a union of democracies, where the rights of minorities are protected under constitutional arrangements and community law, where we have universal systems for health and education covering everybody, where the role of women is safeguarded in family, in society, and in the workplace. Europe is the world champion of human rights, of data protection, of privacy laws. We take care of our elderly. And we do not have the death penalty. And we do not have the death penalty.
We know, We want to know, what are you doing about... What are you doing about?
Feels unsafe in the European Union, I would invite her to tell us in which other block of the world she feels more protected. I do not like to engage in this sort of us against them.
Okay,
We are working on a project of peace and peaceful coexistence. We will not allow the forces of evil that tarnished our history and stained Europe twice in the past century to win again. But frankly, to be accused of being intolerant in Europe is mind-blowing.
But you cannot deny that intolerance exists in Europe.
I think
it exists. You must acknowledge that intolerance exists in Europe. You can quote constitutional arrangements, but they don't necessarily apply in the lived experiences of people of color, people of faith, and minority groups. You haven't answered my question, and I'm very dissatisfied.
Let's go to the Archbishop, who might be able to arbitrate in this discussion.
We're pushing a religious issue of tolerance, understanding, acceptance, and humanity to politicians. And politicians cannot force communities to implement law. They do their best to try to provide truth, understanding, and there is intolerance everywhere. I was born in the United States. We have lots of intolerance there, as you know. I lived in Southeast Asia. There's intolerance there. And it's not only Muslim, Christian. We know the Buddhists, the Hindus, the problems in Thailand, India, and all sorts of places. But religious leaders are the ones who have to guide the community and say, put down your swords and your weapons. And as Scripture says, and build them and make them into plowshares.
Okay, the issue that of course, is faced by most Western democracies nowadays is the fact that religion, organized religion, is not as strong as it used to be, and it has much less impact on the people. You yourself lent me a very, very, very good book called Bad Religion by Ross Douthat of the New York Times, actually. And in it, you know, he talks about how Christianity is basically kind of, you know, falling by the wayside or being receding, even though there's so much faith in America. America is still the most religious country of the great Western democracies. The official religion is receding, and you get people like Oprah Winfrey and people like, you know, Elizabeth Gilbert and these people and Eckhart Tolle, who are kind of occupying the ground that religion, official religion, used to occupy. I wondered whether you agreed with that and whether you experienced that, which is to say your authority receding and people, you know, sort of starting talk shows and TV shows and taking your place.
I'll make it very fast and simple. It's in that phrase that everyone uses, oh, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Right, okay.
And I want spirituality in my own way, my own understanding, and what suits me and makes me feel good.
Right.
It's not that way.
So what way is it?
Well, first of all, it depends on the faith tradition. But it all comes down to truth, values, acceptance, love. You know, I use the example in the United States, on one street, one person could be Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, atheist, and all the children play together. You take those same families, put them in the old world, and they want to shoot each other.
The old world, what is the old world?
Well, Europe, in many ways, some Southeast Asia in other ways. So we've put people at odds. People can live together.
Mr. Schinas, do you agree with that description of Europe as a place where, you know, kids from different religions wouldn't be able to play together in the same street?
Look, I think one has to distinguish between the fact that Europe and both our European and the national systems in Europe offer the most comprehensive guarantees for peaceful coexistence, values, and fighting hate and promoting understanding. Europe is the epicenter of all this. Now, there is, and I concede, an issue of implementation on the ground. There are issues where local and sometimes regional, national governments would have to assume the cost of enforcing these principles and values on the ground. This is not something that can be done from Brussels. And at the same time, what we should continue to strive for is an understanding of each other.
Yeah, I have to interrupt you there because we've only got 1 minute left, and I wanted to go back to Fatima for this final minute. Fatima, you are saying that there is this xenophobia that's, according to you, rampant in Europe. What is your, in a very few seconds, what is your prescription? What do you recommend for us to, get rid of or minimize this problem?
So again, I stand by, the challenge that I put to this panel, in that I do believe that is the lived experience of many young people.
Yep.
So a couple of things: the depoliticization. So at the moment, I think religion is hyper-politicized not just in Europe, but as the Bishop said, in other parts of the world. So depoliticizing religion. For me personally, bringing it back to the element of faith, centered around common values, common ideals, and common leadership. So it's not, whether you're a red faith or a blue faith or a green faith, to pick colors. It's about whether you stand for peace, equality, justice, and fraternity, and all of these things. These are the common values that I would prescribe to depoliticize faith and to depoliticize religion, but also to bring different groups of people together and build harmony, as you said before.
I think that's a really good note to end on. As expected, our panel on religion got a little bit controversial, but I suppose that is to be expected. We were very, very happy to be here with you this morning. Thank you so much.